In John's Gospel, the crowds were divided about the identity of Jesus as the Messiah. Some wanted to arrest him. Later, Jesus said, "You judge by human standards, I judge no one." Jesus refuses to condemn is the heart of the story we just read in today's Gospel. Those righteous leaders brought this woman to him and accused her of adultery, hoping to catch Jesus in a contradiction of the Mosaic law. They asked him whether she should be put to death, as stated by Moses. Jesus was in a little bit of a problem. Roman law prohibited Jews from administering capital punishment. If he agreed that the woman should be stoned, he went against his own teachings on mercy and forgiveness. Then he stoops down and writes on the sand. No one really knows what he wrote. When the woman's accusers went away, Jesus says the famous words, "The one without sin should cast the first stone." One by one they depart. When Jesus is alone with the woman, he makes it clear. He has not come to judge her, but to save her. This is an incredible story and one that is familiar to all of us. Jesus doesn't judge. He does not criticize. He does not condemn. As I read and prayed about this gospel passage, I decided to focus my attention on something our Pope really wants us to focus on during Lent. Pope Francis has repeatedly spoken about gossip and judging others. In fact, he has repeatedly cautioned against gossip, describing it as destructive and an obstacle to evangelization, urging people to instead focus on humility, service, and spreading the gospel. In fact, many of you have seen Pope Francis's recommendation for fasting during Lent. The most important one is the first one. He recommends fasting from hurting words and saying kind words. When we gossip, let's be honest with each other, we all do gossip. We're using hurtful words. You know, thinking about this made me realize that this has been going on for as long as there's been people on earth. The great Roman philosopher and writer Seneca had a very famous saying, "Viesis sunt rerum specius," and this means the appearances of things are deceptive. So when we gossip many times, we're speaking about the appearance of something that is deceptive. Today's gospel has a very famous story that I just summarized, and this is what led me to speak about gossiping, because gossiping is really like throwing stones. Sometimes we don't know the whole story. Sometimes we don't know what someone's going through. Sometimes the appearances of things are so deceptive that we just run with it and gossiping starts. In the gospel passage we just read, we have a woman caught in the act of adultery. Interestingly, the men are not condemned, but that's a whole nother story. And they're ready to stone her. And then Jesus says those famous words about casting the first stone. I now ask you a question. How many times do you cast the first stone when you gossip? How many times do we make assumptions based on the appearances of things which are deceptive? How many times do we say things that are not true about people and really hurt their reputation? Several years ago, you must remember the show American Idol, which was a show where people came out to perform and get famous. It was so interesting yet so funny at times too, and I used to enjoy it. Many countries came up with their own versions of this. The British had a version, and of course Simon, who was the famous nasty person, you might want to say, was on Britain's Got Talent. But one day, a woman came up to sing. She was a simple woman, older than most contestants, and just normal, slightly on the heavy side, and immediately before she walked on the stage, they began to laugh and mock her, and just say to themselves, "Come on, let's get this over with. This is going to be terrible." We could already tell. The entire audience was laughing at her, and it was so sad for me to see. Well, the music began, and it was the famous song from Les Miserables, "I Dreamed a Dream." Now that is a very hard song to sing. The judges even began to laugh and say to themselves, "This one's never going to be able to sing this." Well, not only did she sing it, but she knocked everybody out of their seats. She was phenomenal. Her voice control and her voice was second to none in that entire competition. She's now a famous singer and has recorded many beautiful spiritual songs as well, including an outstanding version of How Great Thou Art, which I know many of you love. You may know her. Her name is Susan Boyle. You can watch this whole scene, it's on YouTube. And this is a perfect example of what I say when I say that the appearances of things are deceptive. Right away, everybody was ready to fling the insults, and the gossip began, and all the untrue things were being said, and so much hurt was spread. But then when she sang, everyone looked like they were hit over the head. You could see the remorse in people's eyes at this phenomenal singer. Today's gospel message clearly tells us not to be hypocrites. Jesus so many times in the gospel goes after hypocrisy. Jesus repeatedly condemned hypocrisy among religious leaders, warning against displays of piety with lacking genuine faith and integrity. In St. Marshall's gospel, he delivered a series of woes against scribes and Pharisees and called them hypocrites. Jesus warned against giving to the needy, praying or fasting in order to be seen by others, stating that such actions are rewarded by people, not by God. Jesus challenged people to first remove the plank from their own eyes before trying to remove the speck from their brother's eye. Again, here, he's emphasizing the need for self-reflection and humility. Jesus warned his disciples to be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. And Jesus quoted Isaiah to describe hypocrites when he said, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And when we gossip, our hearts are far from Jesus." The people warned in today's gospel about throwing the first stone really is a very good lesson for all of us. Let's focus on ourselves first. Look at ourselves first. See ourselves first before we cast the first stone or an insult or begin to gossip. So many times we come to needless and senseless conclusions about people that are not based on facts, and we begin to gossip, and that's really so bad. This is throwing stones. Before we think about casting the stones or gossiping, we need to look at ourselves first and think and say to ourselves, how can I do this? Lent should be a time of self-reflection, a time where we could prepare to make a new beginning at Easter. We need to prepare for that new beginning, and that's the purpose of Lent. During Lent, we need to examine ourselves and see how we could better become a person, but a person of great integrity. You see, we have time in these 40 days, and there's still time left, to help become a better person that's more like Jesus, who we see today giving a great lesson on looking at ourselves first and not being a hypocrite or gossiper or a false person. Many years ago, when I was very young, I believe I was in grammar school, as I remember one of the sisters that taught us telling us this often. And it will serve me as my quote or my message in summarizing my message for today. It's a famous prayer that came from the Native American people. I'm sorry, I don't know the specific tribal nation it came from. I just know it was taught that it was a Native American prayer, and here's the prayer. Lord, help me not to criticize my neighbor until I have walked 1 mile in his moccasins. I repeat, Lord, help me not to criticize my neighbor until I have walked 1 mile in his moccasins. It kind of sums up everything I said today about knowing the whole story, about the appearances of things being deceptive, about not gossiping, about knowing all the facts before we make a judgment, and more importantly, about not being the person to cast the first stone. You all remember that famous saying that people that live in glass houses should not throw stones. Let's remember that too, based on this week's reading. Jesus hated hypocrisy and gossip, and if we are true followers of Jesus, we must hate hypocrisy and gossip as well. Let us never cast those stones. May God bless you.